boys and girls. What do we want to talk about today? Well, this week, Debbie and I had an exchange of information. And in looking over the material, it inspired me to think of some things that come up in the course of my biz, the writing editing biz. And in examining the copy, it inspired me to remember why people need editors in the first place. And this goes along with the conversation that we've been having right now about cognitive biases, because the reason we need editors is because, we all have a very basic bias, the egocentric bias, and we kind of can't see out of our own egos. It's hard to see things from another perspective, and especially in the case of writing, it's hard to see things from the reader's perspective. So editors really exist to save us from ourselves. And editors are objective judges of what's needed to tell a story. And Debbie, as I was thinking about it more this week, I was thinking, like, in a way, does everybody know what theory of mind is? So, it's knowing that other people have thoughts and distinct thoughts. And I thought, that in a way you could say that writers, and I'm as guilty as everybody, a couple of things. Writers, especially those with expertise in an area, are inside the information. So the writer or the speaker doesn't know, the reader doesn't know what they know. And the writer or speaker doesn't know what other people need to know what they know. And so the editor is the broker of that. And the editor, a good editor, is always reading from both the outsider reader's head and the insider's head, the writer's head, and can help the writer understand, and even if the writer can't understand, at least know what's needed to reach the reader's head. And I would say that's probably the most important thing that editors do. So, it's almost as if writers, when it comes to their own writing, it's almost as if they lack a kind of theory of mind. That's how I was thinking about it this week. And, of course, readers come to reading a piece. We're talking about nonfiction here. So readers come to a piece of information, an article, of course, with different amounts of knowledge of the subject being discussed. And of course, the writer can't possibly know how much or how little any person knows. And here is really where it's the writer's skill, and if the writer fails, ultimately the editor's skill in including information, the information that's needed to build the case in the expository case. So the editor knows how to slip in information deftly. And you don't want to do it in declarative sentence after deadening declarative sentence. And you don't want to do it by dumping all the information as if readers don't know. So there's a very skillful use of dependent clauses and sliding information in sideways, sort of wink, wink, nod, nod. It's there, but the reader doesn't feel like he's being hit on the head with it, even if he knows the information by heart. So that's where editors can be deft about it. And all the information has to be there, because you can't make an assumption about what the reader knows, but it's how you gracefully manage it and slide it in without that da-da, da-da, da-da. I'm hammering you on the head with this sentence after sentence. And of course, the editor is helping the reader clarify their perspective, because it's shocking how often knowledgeable people forget or don't know how to display the perspective. We're all vast consumers of information and articles, and we're all reading, especially op-ed articles and things like that all the time, and they all go over information that we know. What makes an interesting op-ed article or any other article is that it's giving us a new perspective on something, and it may be something we already know. And but that's the case in all writing. There should always be a reason for delivering the information. So there should always be a new perspective in what's being delivered. And it's the editor's job to make sure that the writer doesn't forget that big picture and grasps and displays that new perspective. And usually, but not always, but usually you want to hint in the very beginning that there is going to be a new perspective, because otherwise, people say, well, I know this already. You don't want it to come as a surprise conclusion at the end. There are times when you do want that, but there are other times when you don't want that, because you'll lose most of the readers along the way. But it is that new perspective that's important. You want to give someone a clue in the beginning that there is going to be a new perspective. Hang on, this is why this is important. This is why I'm taking the time even to deliver this information to you. And so editors differ in the skills with which they can do this. I'm fortunate to have been at this a long enough time to kind of learn all the ways of doing it, although I'm always open to new ways. And that's why I love reading fiction. I love reading other things, because it's like you're refreshing your skill set. And to some degree it's problem solving, but and sometimes just taking sheer risks. There's no precedent for doing it. Some bug gets in your head, you just want to say it one way. And that's kind of the fun of doing what we do. I have to say, this week I had the extreme good fortune of something that happens maybe once a decade. And that is, I assigned someone, an academic whose writing I like. He's a blogger for Psychology Today. I assigned him an article for the magazine. I had seen something he had written in a blog post, and I thought it was really worthy of pausing on that and expanding it and sort of filtering other information through that lens. And so he and I had about an hour and a half conversation on Zoom last week, where we were discussing the topic, and I kind of told him the kinds of things that he had touched on that I thought were really important to develop. And 2 days later, by the way, I asked him for a 2,500 word article. And 2 days later, he filed the article with me. And I have to say, it was a perfect article. I've just never seen, I was so thrilled. It was so exhilarating for that to happen. And I had a hunch it was written in such a gorgeous tone, and the erudition was worn so lightly through the entire piece that you could feel the flow of it. And I just had the feeling that the whole tone of it came to the writer in one piece, and then he sat down and wrote it, all 2,500 words of it, in one piece, because I couldn't find a seam in there. And I said to him, I said, you don't have to tell me. I said, but I'm guessing that you wrote this in one sitting, and you probably held on to it for a day because you didn't want to show me that you wrote it in one day. You know, it's like, I might cut your fee in half. And it was true. It just, all of his knowledge on the topic came together so magnificently, poetically even, on a topic that the world happens to be struggling with right now. And I was just blown away, and it made my week. I was exhilarated, and that's how editors get their kicks. So that made it a good week for me. So the other ways, the other reasons why the world needs editors is that we know what gets in the way of exposition, and you know, even things that writers are very dearly attached to, a phrase, a character, a little piece of narrative that they've put in, a tangent that they go off on. You know, Faulkner said it. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings, and we editors, look, I love writers. I love what they try to do, and I try to hold on to their darlings and hug their darlings when I can, but we don't have the same emotional attachment to them, and we can give the darlings back to the writer and say, hey, hold on to this for another story and another purpose, and sort of, without murdering the bloody thing, just kind of give it back to the writer and say, use somewhere else. So we're good at doing that. And we also know how to tell a story, even if the writer doesn't. So we help writers tell the story. And, you know, in psychology, sort of I should say human behavior, which is the realm that I'm dealing with. And so much is abstraction. I mean, you just take the very word emotion. It's an abstraction. So what I do is help writers find ways of bringing material down to earth, making it concrete. And you would be shocked at how, in a piece that's almost all abstraction, just one concrete example can really anchor the whole piece at the same time that it gives wings to it, because it blossoms in the imagination of the reader. So we do that, and we add color, and we add pacing if the writer can't, and and rhythm, hopefully rhythm both in the deliverance of the information and just in the wording of the telling. And so, I think I've said this before, but you'd be shocked at really at how inarticulate and vague and imprecise most people are in their thinking, even experts. And so their writing becomes vague and inarticulate and filled with this is and that's, rather than hammering away at what the this is and what the that is. It's just sort of this vague terminology that's sort of, it's like a dust ball in the brain. It's there, it has a vague shape, but it's very airy, and you go to run it through your fingers and it just doesn't hold. So I particularly don't like writing that's approximate. I like writing that's more incisive. And sometimes I think it's because writers are mentally lazy, and that's because writing is really hard work. It's very hard work if you do it well. So editors are facilitators of the thinking and the understanding. I said this before, we're idea architects and we're thought renovators. So, and I think maybe another reason that editors are needed is that I think I alluded to this before. Writers really often fail to convey the significance of what they're telling you in the first place. It's what they know and they don't know. They know what the significance is, and they make the assumption maybe that if they just tell it, other people will grasp the significance. And again, you have to be pretty deft in informing people of the significance, but most people don't know unless it's made explicit. And often toward the front of an article so that a reader knows, hey, this is going to be worth investing my time and attention. So those are all the reasons I could think of, more or less off the top of my head, why I think editors are important in the first place. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So my first thought, as I was listening to you, it was sort of waving in and out, is that editors can be encouraging, editors can be enthusiastic. That when people are writing, if I'm writing something on my own and I haven't discussed it with somebody, it's not, there's a certain time where I'll just feel this kind of hesitancy or lack of enthusiasm. And so listening to you describing how much you liked that article that the person wrote all at once was an example of that. But I imagine that part of the reason why he wrote it or she wrote it so well was that they picked up on your enthusiasm for it before that. It gives the writer, and sometimes it's just an image of the editor. It's not necessarily that the editor actually spoke to you, but it's imagining how you would respond.
Yes, I like what you're saying, Clark, because I think we all write best when we have an idea of the audience in mind. Just one person. You give speeches all the time. You like to glom onto that person in the audience, who's nodding their head, right? Whose eyes are fixed on you. I mean, we all like that. And so I was responding to some thoughts of his I had seen. He understood my enthusiasm for him, and I hope that he had in mind the enthusiasm I had, the receptivity that his ideas would find in me. But yeah, it always helps to have an idea, a concrete idea, of the person. It could be a real person, it could be an imagined person. You know, who that is. It could be a live person, it could be a dead person, it could be a fictional person, it could be someone you want to impress. You know, it's like, okay, you know, you blew me up, I want to show you what I can do. Any number, you know, motivation is such a wispy, individualistic mishmash of things. So having that figure in one's head could be really, really helpful in writing. And I'm glad you brought up that point. Yeah.
It's so interesting the way you said that, visualizing someone. A friend of mine is a professor at Harvard of psychology. What is his specialty? His specialty is false memory, amongst other things, Daniel Brown. And he's also a Tibetan meditation teacher and translator. And in the traditional Tibetan meditation, you visualize a retinue. So people, before you meditate, you visualize all these people, sort of the way that you're describing it. But in the traditional Tibetan way, it's kind of negative. You visualize all of these people and you don't want to do a bad job in front of them. And he said with Westerners, people have so much self-criticism that it's more important to visualize all of these people who are supportive, who will know what to say. And so when I write, sometimes I visualize different writing teachers and editors. In fact, the very best writing teacher I ever had, it's funny, she doesn't really believe this, is Alice Culpepper, who was my journalism teacher for 3 years in high school. And she read everything that I wrote and marked it up. And she explained every single change, including, you know, line edits, but also things like, no, you need to start and explain why this is important. Give an example here.
That's the way I edit.
Yeah, it was having somebody explain it to you. Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, I will embed my questions and my comments in the copy as I go. And by the way, I give as much praise as I do as many questions as I ask. You know, oh, I love this, and I explain why. Because if someone doesn't know why, you know, I'm being inarticulate, they don't know what purpose that serves. So every time I can't tell you how many times I've done articles for other outlets. I haven't written for many outlets except the Times, you know, in the past year or two. But, and that was only because I got asked to do a book review and some op-eds for the Times. And book reviews got to be the world's least remunerative activity. Just, you know, I really, but it's hard to turn down the Times. I forgot where I was going with that.
But you were saying there's both the praise that you give and the questions that you raise.
Yes, I forgot exactly where I was going with that, but it'll come back to me at some point. Yeah, I mean, it's important for writers to know what I like or what works. And oh, I know what I was saying. I used to work with so many editors when I was writing on the outside whose famous magazines, whose comment would be, oh yeah, you know, this is great, without you knowing what it is that they liked. And I'll tell you my favorite story of all. And then, or, you know, this doesn't work, it's a downer, as if every time, I mean, that's like editor's favorite word, it's a downer. If I ever hear it, it's like I just cut off. Sometimes saying something negative is very important. But so my favorite story of editors is when I finished my second book. So my second book was basically on bullies and victims, the social development of kids. I had written an article for Psychology Today on bullies and victims. This is before anybody wrote about it. It went utterly, utterly viral. It was like the year before we were all connected to the internet. So it was syndicated all over the world, just everywhere. And from that, I was asked to do a book, and wrote the book, and I finished the book and during the course of my writing the book, huge upheaval in the publishing industry. 5 editors rotated through the editor's seat of the editor of my book. And I naturally, by the time you get to the 3rd one, really listening to, you get the obligatory phone call from them. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and, I'm taking over. And don't worry, you're in good hands. Well, do worry, because they don't have a bloody investment in your book. I mean, we all know that. They didn't assign it. They're generally not interested in it. They're just running it through the system because they have to. So I finished my book. It's harder and harder to do because I have no idea who the editor is. And then I get this 5th editor, and she's still in diapers, and I'm really, really young. And I turned the book in, worked hard on it. I go away on vacation with my husband. We're up in Maine for a bunch of weeks. I come home, remember telephone answering machines? So I turn on the answering machine on my desk when I get home. And this is after having sweated through this book for a year. And I get this message from my editor. And the message is, well, I read the manuscript. There are no surprises here. I wanted to fucking slit my throat. So like, no surprises there. I sweated day and night to put surprises on every page. I wanted you to be surprised by the writing, and surprised by the findings, surprised by the information, surprised by every blink of the eye that that went into this book.
Now, was that a negative thing or positive thing from her?
Turned out to be a positive thing from her.
That's what I thought. That's really funny.
It was essentially, this is exactly, what it meant was, this is exactly what I was expecting from you. That is not what I heard. Trust me. It was like, in this very monotone voice, but that turned out to be characteristic of her. It's like she had no emotional tone whatsoever. So you wouldn't know whether it was a positive or the worst thing in the world. And it was just, well, there are no surprises here. Whereas if you said it or I said it, it would have been, wow, there are no surprises here. This is just what I was expecting from your fabulous proposal, your fabulous specific proposal. And then, but I honestly, I was ready to slit my throat. And then I have since discovered that other people in the industry could tell just from that sliver of anecdote who the person is, because she's just known for reacting that way. But boy, that was not a welcome message to me. So
yeah, that's the opposite of encouragement, right? The editor can be encouraging, and that's the opposite. It was not at all what you needed.
Yeah.
How did you resolve it?
Pardon me?
How did you resolve that with yourself? How did you move past that?
How did I move past that? I don't remember. I have to think back. I calmed myself down is what I did, because there wasn't really anything to her message after that. And it wasn't that I immediately thought, oh, this is positive, but she doesn't know how to say it. I suspected, just from the flatness of her tone, that might be an element of it, but I didn't know for sure because I really hadn't had much experience in dealing with her. So it was really not what a writer, slits his wrist for, like you work for a year on this book and this is what you get. So
what recommendation would you give to someone who might get that from an editor, and to know, well, maybe you're right and I should go in a different direction, or I should stick to my guns?
So what do you say? I think had it been on the phone and if I knew then what I knew now, I would have said, wow, that stings. I would have been very honest. I would have said, wow, that stings a little bit. Could you open that up for me? Could you tell me a little bit more? Be a little specific. And because it's really inarticulate. I have no idea what it means, except it doesn't sound very good. So that's what I would do. And that is what I do now if I'm ever in that kind of a situation. Maybe I've learned something, Clark, from the Buddhists, where, I'll not get reactive. I will honor whatever punch I feel like I've gotten or disappointment, sit with it for half a second, not throw it back at the person who delivered it to me, but say, hey, that didn't feel great. Could you please tell me more, open it up? And that's how you can find that people sometimes don't mean what it really sounds like, or there's as much positive as negative in it, or there are things that you can go on that really help you in their interpretation of things, but you would never know it from a blanket buzzkill like that.
Right, there's no surprise. Yeah, it's interesting. The phrase that came to mind was baseline. That what this was a story of was that no one in your position would understand her because they didn't understand her baseline. And her baseline was actually, at one of the statistical tails,
yes.
right?
Yes.
Sometimes somebody says something and it's like, it's in the middle and you realize, oh, okay, the odds are that it's like a mixed review. They liked some things, didn't like others.
Right.
Okay, let me ask, can you be more specific? What do you think I should work on? What did you think worked well? But with her, it was so extreme that there was no mental model of, oh, this is a person who's just flat. And yet now, now I imagine, who knows, if somebody said that to me, I might think like, oh, maybe that's something that's good. I was trying to think, I have this vague recollection. I know someone who's like that. Oh, my thesis advisor from college, Dita Sklar, the first woman tenured in the political science department at Harvard, notoriously hard. And at one point during my thesis, she was my tutor for the first semester, one-on-one. Then I went off to write my thesis, and I came in, and I had a little bit of writer's block. I'd never written 150 pages before. And I was crying in her office in Widener Library, this gorgeous office. And I put my head on the table, and she didn't say anything. And then she said, Clark, could you please lift your head? Your tears are about to damage a rare manuscript. And then her only advice was, you'll either write it or you won't.
Oh, wow.
Because my work is done. That was it. And then I turned in my thesis. And actually, there were reasons why it was good external to the writing itself that were involved with it. And she just called me and she said, I wanted to let you know you'll be winning the Dieter Prize for the best thesis this year.
Wow.
And I said, in the department? And she said, no, in the university. And I said, turned out she was wrong. There were like 12 of them or something. And I said, you mean, so you're nominating me? And she said, well, I am nominating you, so you will win. It's a very self-assured person. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The other thing that I thought of as you were describing it, it's a classic, it could be used as a classic cognitive behavioral therapy introduction, right? The person waved, you shout somebody's name, hi, Hara, and then you don't turn. And I think, oh my goodness, I could think, oh, she must be mad at me about that comment at the cocktail party. Or I could think, oh, I wonder if she didn't hear me, right? So you heard this phrase, and I think a lot of people would feel the same way. And it's an example of how it was partly the interpretation of it, even automatically, that led to these feelings.
Yes, it's sort of this neutral phrase. It's like a Rorschach, you know? It's like how you respond to it is, you know, a reflection of your baseline, you know, mental proclivity. And, you know, I was just stung. I remember just almost reeling backwards when I sat down at my desk and played that message. Whoa.
The other thing that's so striking about that story is that it's not just the detail of the technology that you came home and the answering machine. It is a part of our world that seems forever to be gone, which is that you could go off to Maine for weeks, and it wasn't just that you came back and there was this old answering machine. It was this old way of life where one could check out for a couple of weeks or a month and no one would mind, right? That was completely fine. And you could really relax, as opposed to, I have a friend who's a student of mine, and now he makes, let's see, he's 30, I think he's 32. He's a partner at a Danish law firm, does real estate, mergers and acquisitions. And when I knew him, he was a professional model. He was a professional Danish model. That's how I knew him. Now he looks kind of middle-aged and dumpy in his 30s. And he says, when he goes on vacation, he still checks his phone, but not as often. And I said, how often is not as often? He said, well, there will sometimes be 20, even 30 minutes, and I won't.
Wow, all of 30 minutes.
But I said this to another friend of mine who was a partner at this big Chicago law firm, and actually head of their mergers and acquisitions. And he said, oh, you should talk to my wife, Lisa.
Murders and acquisitions?
Murders, yeah, it could be murders. It's mergers, but they do murder jobs in the process. That's true, too. Right. I should tell him that. And his wife, Lisa, said he sleeps with the phone under his bed, and if he wakes up in the middle of the night, he checks it.
Lots of people do. That's more common than not, actually.
Wow. Do people check their phone at night?
Or have it with them in bed. And people find it very strange that I have my phone. My house is shaped like an L, and my phone is in the kitchen, which is at one end of the L, and my bedroom is at the far other end. And trust me, I'm not walking into my kitchen in the middle of the night. I'm nowhere near my phone, and people are shocked to know that I don't immediately respond, or that I won't hear a phone call at 6 a.m. or something like that, because the phone is on completely at the other end of the house, and I don't sleep with it. And that seems to be more the exception than the rule, at least among the people I hang with. So, but
a lot of them have it right there, yeah.
I was just made a little bit sad when you said it was a vanished world, because when my book was done was when my second husband died. So it really is a vanished world. Yeah. And yeah, I remember my office had a fax machine. Remember them? And I had two answering machines. I mean, it was just completely different world going on then. And fortunately, the book came out just after he died. And I say fortunate because I was able to, it kind of got me out of the house. And 6 days, I'm happy that I did this 6 days after he died. I kept a meeting with the publisher and the publicist. Even though I cried my eyes out, it was like, and I just told them, hey, they'll move through me like a storm, and it'll be gone in 5 seconds. You know, the way Jessica was talking about last night.
Right.
It was like a squall would move in like a shower, and then the sun would come out again. That's the nature of grief. And I was fine. I mean, I didn't stop functioning. So I did, I did Shiva, and I, whatever. But I never stopped functioning. I'm really glad of that. And I'm sitting here with, I gotta get this. So this is a poster from Barnes Noble of
Wow.
one of the Barnes and Nobles. I can't remember which one. Where I was doing a book signing at one of the Barnes and Nobles. It's just one of the very funny little pieces of things I hung on to. So yeah. What else can I tell anybody about writing and editing?
Well, that brings up a question I was thinking about, which is, it's the big topic of writers' routines, but it's in this very specific topic of how you've noticed you carve out when you're writing or when you're editing. It may be different. How do you do that? Do you do it in the Pomodoro method? Is I'm going to do this for 24 minutes, take a 6-minute break? Do you just keep doing it until someone interrupts? How do you manage it?
I'm not sure I do manage it, except that I don't procrastinate. Very, very, very early in my career, I would put off a challenging assignment until, you do that a couple of times, especially if you're writing a big, couple of 1,000-word feature article, and then you get into it and you love it and you wish you had more time, and then you realize, well, I could have had more time if I pushed the start date, earlier. And very quickly, because of the way the internal rewards are, didn't take very long for me to end whatever procrastination there was. And the procrastination, I'm guessing, as I'm trying to recall, was probably fear of how my piece would be received, because my first job was with such talented people. I didn't really fully have imposter syndrome. I did for a day, but it'd be like, oh my God, I have to do this cover story, and these people are so brilliant and talented around me, and that would put me off. But the rewards of writing when you get going and into flow are so great that you can look forward to it. I don't know. I don't have a formula. I did this piece I did on doctors, which I sent to Debbie to give to people as an example of a piece that I felt came out right and that did everything I wanted it to do, including display sympathy for or including have the reader feel sympathy for physicians without my telling them to. So that involved a lot of interviews with people, both people who were telling their stories of near suicide and people who were inside the heads of physicians who train them, who trained them, who were among them, who treated them, or who were on the front lines in various ways. And so what I did with that, and it's not something you usually do with all my articles, what I did with that was every time I did an interview, I sort of outlined the basic ideas from the interview. And I just stuck them in an evolving document. And every time, so it was basically my document of why doctors are in distress. And so I was sort of chronicling all the ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that was, I mean, I always outline an article at some point, usually not before I begin an article. When I'm first thinking about an article, I always have a blurb in my head about the importance of what I'm saying. It's like when you do a book proposal and you go into the weeds in writing a book, and you have to have that shining paragraph to remind you of what's important and why you're doing this and what the whole goal of the whole project is. So when I'm doing a major feature article, and hopefully I will get lost in the weeds, I enjoy that experience. Although I also like extracting myself from them. I always need something to remind me of the biggest of the frames of why I'm doing this. And so when I do that at the beginning of the beginning, could be weeks before I start writing, that always becomes a driver, becomes a motivator, becomes a driver of activity. I have something on paper. And I don't know, you know what? I don't necessarily have a process. For me, the really hardest part is getting that establishing paragraph in the article somewhere that gives it momentum, like it's just after a lead and before you relax into a more relaxed exposition phase. The lead might be a narrative of someone's story, personal, an anecdote. And once I get past that, then I have the purpose, then I have the direction, then I have everything there. And I go. Sometimes I do articles that are so damn hard informationally that it can put me off. That's happened about 3 or 4 times in my career, where they're really tough. The information itself is really tough, and I have to toggle through different levels of explanation by experts, and in order to grasp it myself well enough to write and to explain its importance. Sometimes even when the primary sources haven't described its importance, those are tough. And I have to tie my ass to the chair. No getting away from that.
Is that where the primary authors, that might be a researcher, and they're in the weeds and they're not really in the business of explaining the grand significance?
Yeah. And usually I try to do an interview with them where I will ask, sort of draw larger and larger pictures and smaller and smaller, details as well. Not everybody is equally good at doing that. It might be someone else who turned me on to them and said, hey, you've got to talk to so-and-so because this is the work that's really important. And so you know it's important, but they are not very good at explaining it. I'm dealing with someone like that right now. He's revolutionarily important.
Well,
And he doesn't and when you understand his work, you go, why doesn't the whole world know about this? And the whole world doesn't know about it. When you read his work, you just go, oh my God, this is just amazing. And the whole world doesn't know about it because he talks in a language that he doesn't relate to what the rest of the world knows. And so it's almost inaccessible to people. And I had to make it accessible to myself because I tasked myself with writing about it almost in a encyclopedic entry way for Psychology Today. That's how I even got onto the topic and forced myself to do it. And we now have this is kind of amazing, an international study group built around his work. And we meet once a week. I try to make those meetings. I don't always do it. And it sparks some of the most amazing thinking. And half of it is trying to translate between his language system, trained like everybody else, in psychology and neuropsychology, and into the ways that other people think. And if someone can't get out of their brain and into the rest of the world, say, well, this is how this relates to that, but can't see out of their own framework, ouch. And I tasked myself with doing that. I can't say I fully succeeded. This is a case where I was more approximate than incisive. And, and I figured that was the best I could do. And I let myself off the hook for that.
That's amazing, though, that you not only were able to master it well enough to understand it, but explain it in such a way that people would want to meet weekly to think about it. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment.
Right. I put together these people, group in Seattle, and I mean, they're just all around the world and amazing. And actually the work has significance for COVID-19 and finding cures that grew out of psychology and a particular view of the nervous system. It's really fascinating work, and hopefully the world will hear more about it. And I'm happy to have been the facilitator of getting these people together. So, but yeah. So,
that's amazing. Can you tell us what the topic is, or is it secret?
No, the topic isn't secret at all. So, I don't want to say who the person is, but the work is basically, it goes under the label of polyvagal theory.
Oh, yeah.
The working of the autonomic nervous system.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And it's critically important why things happen, how things happen, how it relates to immune response, how our fear response relates to our immune response. Now, some of that has been worked out in the world of the neuroendocrinology and things like that, but sort of the finer connections have not. And it has critical importance for things like what we know is killing people with COVID-19, which is the cytokine storm.
Right. I was just thinking about that. Right.
Okay. And well, when you think that, what happens with cytokines are built up by any kind of stressful experience, and you look at cumulative effects of stress, trauma, if you live a life of poverty, discrimination, stress is just, you walk out the door, you get out of bed.
Oh, wow. So that's really a different take
It's a
on
very different,
why people of color
are
are doing
having
worse.
disproportionate. So also why obesity? Why diabetics? Because that's they are having they have inflammation for other reasons. Um, so all these things go together.
Wow, that's so amazing. It's funny. I'm trying to remember when it was. I have a book on polyvagal theory back at my university office on this top shelf.
Okay, Stephen Porges, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a gift from Paul Ekman, who said it was one of the
Oh,
best
wow.
books. It's one of the best books he ever read. So he gave it to me for one of my birthdays. Yeah.
So if you understand polyvagal theory, so much makes sense, but nobody studies the autonomic nervous system. So I can understand Paul telling you
Well,
this.
he studied in his day, was studied the autonomic nervous system, and there's some other people who study it in
Right.
his field, right? But it's fairly neglected. Yeah, that's so interesting, right? And if you don't study it, there's not an easy way in. You really do need a kind of ambassador or idea broker to be able
Exactly.
to connect it, because it doesn't map on to the major
No, it doesn't.
either academic or popular systems
You
of
hit it.
understanding,
You
right?
exactly hit it. That's exactly the case. It doesn't map on, and he makes it worse by his language not mapping
Right,
on.
right,
In some
right,
cases,
right.
he will make the translation, but I have to make it, or the brilliant people who are in this, weekly polyvagal theory study group are,
Mm.
just doing it. And some of them are positively brilliant. And
Oh, that's so amazing. And that can make such a difference right now, right?
I'm going to send you something.
All right, I'll look for it. Thank you.
Blow your mind after this about just what we were talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I love that.
Me too.
Like chills from that. Oh, look, Dwayne is here.
Yeah, send it to me too.
okay, I'm going to make
As
it
usual, like construction.
I wish I had you. This week we had a little heat wave in San Francisco. Our house isn't even air conditioned, as nearly all houses aren't here. And there's a heat wave, and we had to get it cooled down. So we got what is that? It's a Dyson air filter and fan that's supposed to cool. By the way, don't buy it.
Okay.
But we could not assemble it. We spent like 45 minutes trying to figure it out. It was just it was just so funny. And it's so elegant. Like, it looks beautiful.
Where does it go? Does it go in a window? Does it go?
No, here, I'll show you the picture of it, but really don't buy it. Actually, it looks beautiful, but it doesn't work. But that's what it is.
Cutter.
It doesn't need to go into a window. No, so via wire cutter, we actually got a portable air conditioner, because that can vent out our sliding glass door, or it can vent out a regular window, and it doesn't require a lot of installation. But this, in theory, would have been great. And by the way, it does work well as an air filter, but I have air filters. It doesn't really cool, and it doesn't really blow. So when we finally got it to work, it was just a disaster. And it took me 3 hours to convince Dyson to take it back. I mean, it was really, yeah, it's really funny.
Hey, Hara, do you have any tips that you would give to the group? You have people on live stream who are saying hi to you, by the way, Allison, Liana, and Susan Jacquet. But do you have any tips for us on what we should do in terms of an editor, and how we should, from today, you've given us a lot. I've sought you out for editor, as an editor. Others have, you've had experiences with editors, positive and negative. What's your one takeaway for everyone today?
I guess my one takeaway is to to really push an editor to really get nitty gritty, down and dirty, and to force editors to be very specific, and articulate what it is that's bothering them. If there's something that they don't like, what is it, so that you know what needs repair, so that you can be a better writer, and in the process you're making them a better editor. They don't know that, but that exchange has to happen. So think of editing. So many people think of editing as an adversarial process. I don't. I think of editing, I'm a cheerleader for the writer. I want the writer to do well. I've assigned something to the writer. If I ever have to kill an article, I mean, I feel it. I feel like I made a mistake. Did I choose the wrong writer? Did I conceive of the topic wrong? Usually, I mean, I'll just rewrite something. But sometimes a piece comes in so bad that you can't resurrect it in any way. And you don't have time to rewrite it, so you just kill it. And, if I've done that 3 times in 28 years of Psychology Today, I would say that's a lot. Probably twice. So it's not an adversarial process. It's really a collaborative process. And I don't know if all editors approach it as a collaborative process. But even if they have criticisms to make, unfortunately, sometimes when you have criticisms to make, people tend to get negative. They tend to psych themselves into a negative way of expressing it. And so, when in fact that may not be what they really mean, but it comes across that way. So no matter what the editor does and what the tone of the editor is, the writer's just got to remember it's a collaborative process. And if you don't understand something that the editor says, just sit with it and ask them to be more specific, or open it up, or tell me what you think would work here, or tell me why this doesn't strike you right, and how would you do it. Just, you're on the same team, you're all pulling for the same thing. So I think it's really very important to do that, even when the editor forgets that that's his or her task. And admittedly, sometimes they do. So, because in the process of delivering unwelcome news, they may unfortunately get a little bit negative and, be anticipatorily negative and hostile. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So that would be my advice. It's really a super collaborative effort.
I've got a non-construction related question. So if you are, let's say like you're doing some research and you find, I just researched a quote, and so I found the source of the quote. The quote's from, it stems from like the 1700s or something like that. And the actual letter that it's taken from gives extra context, which is useful, but then it gives, there's more context, which makes it not useful at the same time. So if you're trying to convey this in, your writing, but you want to include the good stuff, but not necessarily include the stuff that would turn somebody off to whatever was actually being said. Is there a way to do that without, I guess ethically is the word.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you, as concisely as possible, try to explain the context if it didn't speak for itself as you quoted it?
Well, I just wrote this like an hour ago, so I've been working on I had to go back and try to understand. But there's one sentence.
I often do that too. I understand what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like one sentence in the source that completely changes the meaning of what the person was trying to get across.
Uh-huh.
And that's
So you're saying, what's your ethical responsibility?
right, to include the full context of what someone was saying.
You know, okay, that's a really interesting question, because my inclination would be to nod to, the maybe full context, not fully supporting things. That's a case where a dependent clause becomes your ally, where you could say something like, although this was said to, against this,
Okay.
here's what John Jones said about that. So, you're solving a problem.
Yeah.
You want to be faithful, and you can get the information in, without lumpily saying, some flat declarative sentence. You're being faithful to your source, and you're just kind of slipping it in there. And
Okay. Thank you.
not the main point. Yeah. So that's how I would do it.
Okay. I'll let you know how it works out.
Yeah. Run it by me, Dwayne.
Okay.
Sure.
Back to construction.
Okay. I'll be happy to answer any other questions that are coming from anywhere.
I don't hear any coming in, but this was super fascinating, Hara, as always. I learned so much. And when you have dialogue with individuals today, the dialogue, mostly with Clark, I learned so much. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone who asks questions and who dialogues with you. So thanks for another great week, and I hope to see everybody back next week.
See you next
Thank
week.
you for doing this. Thank you, Debbie.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Ciao.